Welcome, everyone, to this briefing on refugee resettlement in the Commonwealth of Virginia. This briefing is presented by the Virginia Free Citizen Watch, Your Eyes on Virginia. From our research, what we've come to know about the US Refugee Admissions Program right now is that it is secretive, it's complicated, it's very expensive, and it's unfair. It's unfair to the US taxpayers, and it's unfair to the refugees it is supposed to serve. Now, how did the refugee program get started? Things really got a kickstart with the Refugee Act of 1980, the architects of which were Ted Kennedy and Joe Biden. President Jimmy Carter at the time championed the Refugee Act of 1980. Previous to this, refugees were cared for and sponsored by churches and other private charity groups. The United States chose the refugees that we were willing to accept. And the United States screened and vetted them according to their own criteria for criminal, political, and terrorist ties. We also screened them for communicable diseases. Having a disease was a reason not to be admitted to the United States. And we also insisted on financial sponsors for refugees and guarantees that they would not take the jobs of Americans or become a financial burden on U.S. citizens. All of that changed with the Refugee Act of 1980. Now, here are the top 10 things that you need to know about the Refugee Resettlement Program as it stands today. First of all, it's worth noting that the U.S. takes in twice as many refugees as all other countries combined. Right now, the UN, specifically the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, chooses which refugees we take and where they're coming from and how many. The UN does the initial screening and then hands it off to the U.S. State Department to continue the process. And then the State Department hands off the resettlement process to a private network of contractors, otherwise known as voluntary agencies, hence the nickname VOLAGs, or refugee resettlement agencies. These agencies select the resettlement communities, how many your community will receive, where they're coming from, and they are paid, these resettlement agencies are paid by the head, by the refugee. The federal government funds 90% of the initial resettlement costs through federal grant programs. Now, up until very recently, Congress has failed to supervise, question, or reform refugee selection, screening, and resettlement. Obviously, because of public pressure and outcry, Congress is beginning now to hold hearings. We'll get to those most recent developments a little bit later on in the presentation. Integration and navigation have replaced assimilation as the goal of immigration. It used to be when refugees came to this country, they came to be Americans. They came to assimilate. This is no longer the case. Now refugees come to integrate. In other words, to live in the United States and to do business in the United States and go to school in the United States, but not necessarily to learn English or to give up, their old value systems and their way of doing things. That's what integration means. When I say navigation, I'm referring to the fact that the refugee resettlement agencies consider it a major part of their task to teach refugees about all of the benefits and rights that they have and how to register for them and how to get them. Refugees are eligible for all federal, state, and local welfare programs 30 days after arrival. Now, refugees usually don't start taking local and state welfare programs within that 30-day, after that 30-day period, simply because their federal money has not run out yet. The federal money runs out. By that time, they make sure that they're registered for all the rest at the state and local level. Here I state that refugees are not adequately treated for communicable diseases. For example, tuberculosis and HIV. The State Department and everyone involved in these programs will tell you that refugees are screened and treated before they come to the United States. And yet we are still seeing refugees with communicable diseases that until very recently had been wiped out in the United States, showing up in our country. So something is amiss here. Either they're not being treated properly, or they're not being screened properly, or a combination of both, or they're just letting them in when they're sick and opting to treat them once they get here. Medium-sized towns and cities serve as the main targets for the Refugee Resettlement Program. And your state and local elected officials have little to no clue that any of this is going on. Now, these two people pictured here are the ones deciding the future of your town and your cities. On the left is Ann Richard, Assistant Secretary of State for Population, Refugees, and Migration in the State Department. And on the right is Antonio Guterres, formerly the President of Portugal and currently the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. Now, here we have a situation where the State Department actually outsources the selection of the refugees to the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, who also do the initial screening and then hand it back to the State Department. The State Department is also outsourcing the settlement of refugees in the opposite direction to a collection of 9 private contractors who are funded through the federal grant program. Now, in November 2014, Obama announced his task force on New Americans. His ramped up efforts to bring more refugees to the country and to integrate, immigrants into local communities. Together with Obama, his architects of change are recognizable here to many of you. Cecilia Munoz, formerly of La Raza, on the left, and Valerie Jarrett on the right. In this task force for New Americans, this new program, the Obama administration is literally talking about seeding communities with diversity and making sure that the soil, in other words, your community, is properly prepared to receive these seedlings. In other words, has a proper mindset. You've got your head screwed on straight, and your thinking is right in order to increase the diversity in your town. So yet another case, perhaps, of if you can't change America's mind, then change the people. Others in support of refugee resettlement are what we have lovingly nicknamed the Jihad Caucus. In May of this year, a group of 14 U.S. senators sent a letter to President Obama urging him to allow in an additional 65,000 Syrians into the country as refugees. This group was led by Dick Durbin of Illinois, and our Senator Tim Kaine from Virginia is on the list as well. All of this despite the fact that in February of 2015, the FBI and other security agencies testified before Congress that it was almost impossible to vet and screen Syrian refugees slated for the U.S. because of a lack of data. Now, in addition to your senators and your presidents and the UN, you have what we call secondary advocacy and assistance organizations. Some of these organizations, these foundations, you will recognize. The Ford Foundation, Open Society Institute, founded and run by George Soros. The Tides Foundation. This is but a partial list of foundations who are pushing more immigration, more refugee resettlement in the name of diversity and making sure that American towns or cities are multicultural enough to their liking. One of these groups, much smaller right now, is called Welcoming America. They have been contracted by the feds to make sure that your town, your soil, is ready for these new seedlings and that no pockets of resistance develop in your town. That's what anyone who, raises concerns or wishes to counter the idea that bringing refugees into your county and city is a good idea, or even that it needs to be rethought, reconsidered, those are pockets of resistance. That's what they're calling you. Their main task is to make sure that these pockets of resistance are countered and hopefully don't ever develop. By the way, Welcoming America was funded with a technical assistance grant of $175,000 of your tax money. Still others have plans to counter opposition that they see rearing its ugly head. One of them is the Hebrew Immigration and Aid Society. In 2013, they issued a paper titled Resettlement at Risk, in which they set forth several recommendations to counter opposition. It's worth noting before I get into these recommendations put forth by HIAS that HIAS is also funded through the federal grant program. So here they are using a federal grant program to counter or lobby against or give direction for countering any sort of resistance to what they're doing. Their recommendations were to get organized, be proactive, to prevent resettlement backlash, develop a rapid response plan together with, very clear and organized messaging. Partner with other immigrant advocates for mutual support and collaboration in order to stem the tide of rising anti-refugee sentiment. Track anti-resettlement legislation, I'm assuming, so that they would have, so they can catch it early and have plenty of time to lobby against it. Conduct opposition research on local anti-refugee leaders. That's me and anybody else who's willing to step up and open their mouths. They strongly suggested that in order to do this, people refer names and groups to the Southern Poverty Law Center and this new organization called the Center for New Community, which basically is an advocacy group to counter anti-nativism. If you're against refugees or immigrants or anything like that, you are now called a nativist. That's the new pejorative. Get used to it. You'll be hearing a lot more of it in the weeks and months to come. Now, just so we have some perspective on this, exactly how many people are we talking about? Here are the numbers of refugees, asylees, and diversity visas, which is basically the visa lottery that is still going on, that come to this country for each fiscal year during the past 5 years. As you can see, this totals around 120,000 on average per year, give or take. Now, this does not include student visas. It does not include unaccompanied minors, regular immigration. It does not include family reunification, the secondary, wave of newcomers. These are just the very basic numbers. This gives you, a point of reference for the numbers nationwide on an annual basis. Now, who are the contractors that I mentioned before? There are 9 major contractors nationwide. The ones featured in red are the contractors active in Virginia. US Conference of Catholic Bishops, International Rescue Committee, Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services, and Church World Service. Here you see a map of 350 subcontractors in 190 cities. You'll see the concentration in the Northeast through the central states and down through the Mid-Atlantic. Here you have refugee resettlement agencies falling all over themselves and competing with each other for refugee service contracts. Now, keep in mind, these organizations are not passing the plate on Sunday. You will note that many of these organizations, they appear to be affiliated with religious organizations. They have names that sound like charities. They are not. They are masquerading as charities. There's a lot of money to be made in refugee resettlement, and we're going to have a look at it very shortly. The top 5 states for fiscal year 2014 for new refugees: Texas, California, New York, Michigan, Florida. Now, where is Virginia on this? Here are the top 10 states. We're not even in the top 10. We're more like the top 20. In 2014, the estimated arrivals in Virginia were 1,950 refugees. Just to give you a sense of perspective. And now I'd like to share with you an infographic that we worked up here at the Virginia Free Citizen Watch to try and explain to you the flow of the money. It's important to know how, who feeds whom in the process. It all starts with the U.S. taxpayer, who funds the government, and in turn, all of the government departments who are in any way involved in refugee resettlement. We're also funding the UN and the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, who in turn chooses our refugees for us. It's worth noted here that the UN right now, to a great extent, is controlled and directed by the major voting bloc made up of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Both organizations, which I think it can be said, seldom have the best interest of the United States at heart. Money flows through from the taxpayer through Congress to the different departments that are involved in refugee resettlement. These departments, in turn, issue grants to our state office, which in turn sends money to the refugee agencies and contractors. In Virginia, we do have a state office for newcomer services. It operates as an office under the Department of Social Services. The Virginia ONS puts out bids and issues contracts to resettlement agencies and contractors active in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So what's going on here is the federal government passes grants through the Virginia Office of Newcomer Services to refugee resettlement agencies on the ground here in Virginia. The Virginia Office of Newcomer Services is basically a cutout or a pass-through entity. These resettlement agencies, in turn, bring refugees to your community, all unbeknownst to your city, your county. Now, it's worth noting here that there are two other flows of taxation, one at the state level from Virginia taxpayers and one from the local level. The Virginia taxpayers pay a Virginia income tax and fees and etc. In turn support the operation of Virginia Office of Newcomer Services. In addition, the Virginia taxpayers also contribute to the social welfare programs that the refugees utilize at an outsized rate. We'll get to more of that a little bit later on in the presentation. At the city and county level, residents are taxed through property tax, etc., in order to support their local health, law enforcement, and school services. Here too, the refugee population takes an outsized share of those, welfare and servicing dollars. Now, how much money are we talking about? I said before that there's a lot of money in refugee resettlement. There is. Here, Church World Service, International Rescue Committee, Lutheran Immigrant and Refugee Services, all of them active in Virginia, according to their IRS Disclosure Form 990, 2012. Here's the amount of federal funding, the percentage of revenue that's funded by the federal government, lobbying, and top staff compensation. Let's have a look at International Rescue Committee. They receive in government funding, now these are national figures, of course, over $305 million. So the federal government funds 68% of their total revenue. They spent $39,000 on lobbying, and they compensated themselves, the 11 top staff, rather handsomely. So what do we have here? We have the government giving grants to organizations that are cross-dressing as charities and religious institutions, who in turn pay themselves very handsome salaries, with plenty of money left over to lobby Congress so that they can get even more money to reward themselves even more handsomely and lobby Congress for more money. In addition to the direct funding, there are special grants available. The list here is but a partial list of special grants available nationwide. These refugee resettlement agencies submit for grant money, a request for grant money under these programs as well. Some of my favorites are the refugee, the individual development accounts, under which, if a refugee is saving for a large purchase, say a home or a car, the U.S. government will match them dollar for dollar up to $2,000 for an individual and $4,000 for a household. Another favorite of mine is the refugee agriculture program, where they teach refugees how to farm so that they can, because every refugee really should have access to locally grown fruits and vegetables. In Virginia, these graphics are from the Virginia Office of Newcomer Services, the state plan for 2015. Over here on your left, here are the areas of resettlement, where the main target for resettlement of refugees is, of course, Northern Virginia, with the balance of the state receiving the rest of the refugees in the Shenandoah Valley, Central Virginia, the Hampton Roads area, and oddly enough, out here, Roanoke and Martinsville, down here by the North Carolina border. Over here are the cities and counties involved in both the blue and the red that you see on the map. Now, you're probably wondering why Roanoke and Martinsville all the way down here. There has been anecdotal evidence that the areas and towns in which refugees are resettled sometimes correlate to a major industry in need of a cheap labor force. If anyone is out there in Roanoke or Martinsville or any of these other areas for that matter, and they can find out where refugees are working, that would be very helpful. Now, in Virginia, the top countries of origin since 2003 for refugees are as follows: Iraq, Bhutan and Nepal, Somalia, Burma, and Iran. Since 2003, Virginia has received about 16,500 refugees. Since 2010, almost 7,000. Now, the Virginia Free Citizen Watch, through the Freedom of Information Act, gathered information from the Office of Newcomer Services here in Virginia regarding the activities of Virginia local-based refugee resettlement agencies, the contracts that were issued to them, the number of refugees that came in, and where they were settled. The FOIA covered about, approximately 630 pages and cost a couple of $100. As you can see, here are the details of what Catholic Charities of Arlington is doing in Arlington, Fredericksburg, Commonwealth Catholic Charities, Newport News, Richmond, Roanoke, Church World, Harrisonburg, Richmond, the IRC, and Lutheran Social Services. Now, oddly enough, very recently, actually in August of this year, one of our volunteers found ads on Craigslist for IRC personnel for a new office in Richmond. So, what we have here is we have the IRC, Church World, and Commonwealth Catholic Charities competing with each other in Richmond for refugee resettlement services. Now, it's worth note that on all of the IRC websites, they make sure that everyone knows what newly arrived refugees receive: furnished home, help with rent, health care, food, education for their children, social services, job training. Sounds like something that many of us could use right about now. Now, all of these resettlement agencies will tell you that refugees become self-sufficient in about 6 months. Well, it depends on what the definition of self-sufficiency is. In 2012, the Office of Refugee Resettlement offered their own definition of self-sufficiency to the General Accounting Office for their report. In it, they stated that the Office of Refugee Resettlement considers a refugee self-sufficient if they don't receive cash assistance. They can receive non-cash assistance and still fall under the definition of self-sufficiency. The Office of Refugee Resettlement went even further to state that the cash assistance that they were referring to was specifically TANF, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, or another program called Refugee Cash Assistance, which is specific to refugees. So technically speaking, you could be a recipient of supplemental security income from Social Security and still be considered self-sufficient by the ORR. So what are other non-cash public assistance programs? You can get food stamps, you can get Medicaid, you can get subsidized housing, and perhaps SSI, and still be defined by the ORR as being self-sufficient. Again, this is another example of doublespeak. If you don't meet the criteria based on the widely accepted definition of a term, then change the definition, which is exactly what the Office of Refugee Resettlement has done here. So you have to watch people when they talk about different terms. Make them define the terms. It's our contention that a lot of the money being spent in these programs constitute an undisclosed cost and an unfunded mandate that fall on local and state taxpayers. Because the minute that federal money runs out, the local and state taxpayers pick up the bill for all of these services, social services, healthcare, schools, the criminal justice system and law enforcement, and interpreter services in all of the above. Now, what kind of money are we talking about? Let's have a look. What I did next in this form, don't look too closely at this form because we're going to skip over this rather quickly. I compared refugee populations that arrived in the 5-year period between 2006 and 2011 with US and Virginia populations of 2011. Now, I chose 2011 because those are the years for which consistent data is available for U.S. populations and Virginia populations based on the U.S. Census of 2010. We're going to skip this straight to the chase. Refugees arriving in that 5-year period earn less than half of the wage earned by the average Virginian. So it's understandable that they would be more dependent on public assistance at a rate of, and they are more dependent on cash or public assistance at a rate of 17.2 times greater than that of the average Virginian. Now, next we had a look at specific welfare programs. Again, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here. I'm going to go straight to the programs for which the Commonwealth of Virginia, through taxpayer money, matches funds with the U.S. government. So refugee households, again, we're in 2011, use these programs at a far greater rate than Virginia households. SNAP, or food stamps, were utilized 6.4 times the rate of Virginia households. Here, it's worth noting that Virginia matches 47 cents for every dollar in federal funding. So Virginia taxpayers chip in twice, once in their federal taxation and once through their Virginia taxation for refugees who use food stamps at 6.4 times the rate of Virginians. Next, TANF, Temporary Aid for Needy Families. Refugee households use this program 17.8 times the rate of Virginia households. And here again, Virginia chips in 81 cents for every dollar in federal funding. And finally, Medicaid. Here, refugee households are on Medicaid at a rate 5.4 times that of Virginia households. For Medicaid, Virginia matches dollar for dollar with federal funding. All of these constitute a hidden and unfunded mandates on state and local taxpayers. Now, we have chosen in this presentation to concentrate on the money aspect, the transparency aspects, the state sovereignty aspects, because these are the areas where we feel we will have the most support when it comes to money. Everybody's the same color, everybody's the same denomination, they're all green. There are, however, other elements that should be considered in the Refugee Resettlement Program, which are much more difficult to quantify, and that is why we have chosen to basically stay away from them. We suggest that you do as well and concentrate on the financial, the fiscal, the transparency issues involved in resettling refugees in your community. But for the sake of the conversation, we can't complete this briefing without addressing those issues that, as I said before, are difficult to quantify. We've put them in a category that we call what could possibly go wrong. Everyone recognizes these two and their adorable mother. The Tsarnaev brothers were admitted to the United States as refugees or asylees from Chechnya in 2002. Obviously, somebody the ball there. These individuals, the first one on the list is from a refugee from Togo in Africa, wasn't in this country 9 days before he tried to rape somebody in Leesburg, Virginia. This fellow in the middle, a cab driver from Northern Virginia, refugee from Somalia, accused and eventually convicted of recruiting for Al-Shabaab. This lovely couple in Iowa came to the country about 10 years ago from Bosnia. They've been arrested, charged, and I believe convicted of charges that they sent, money to ISIS, support for ISIS. And it's not just Eastern Europe, Africa, and Africa. We need to re-examine our refugee resettlement program from Burma, especially when it comes to the Rohingya minority in Burma that is asking for admittance here to the United States. The Rohingya, they basically started a civil war in their own country, the aim of which was to break away and establish their own state under Islamic law. The Buddhist majority was having none of this. Led by Buddhist monks, they started a counterinsurgency and now want the Rohingyas out. Since 2003, The United States has admitted almost 12,500 Rohingyas from Burma here. Again, what could possibly go wrong? Now, I've given you all this information. What do you do now? One, get informed and stay informed. Share what you know with others, your elected officials, your local groups at all levels. Demand answers and accountability from your elected officials, again, at all levels. We will have, suggested talking points. We submit to you that, the smartest way to go with this is to stay focused on issues of state sovereignty, accountability, transparently, and most importantly, on the money and budget issue. And again, here, please take into consideration that your local government and state government officials don't know anything about this because it's a secretive program, it's a complicated program, and if they don't know anything about it, it's because it's been hidden from them as it has been hidden from us. So go gently. Make your will known. Let everyone know on what you want to see. And support us with your time, your participation. Donations are always welcome to cover the costs of Freedom of Information Acts and the research involved in compiling all of this information. Join our pocket of resistance or form your own. Now, in the areas of get informed, stay informed, these are excellent resources, all of which are available on our website, all of the links to which these publications, Center for Immigration Studies, Numbers USA, and of course, and Corcoran's website up here, Refugee Resettlement Watch at WordPress. Excellent resource. Now, just to bring you up to date as to what's been going on lately, you remember I said that the U.S. Congress has failed in its job of supervision and oversight. Well, lately things have been waking up. On October 1st, the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on Immigration and the Natural Interest held a hearing specifically to discuss the Refugee Resettlement Program as it pertains to Syrian refugees. This witness from Department of Homeland Security could not answer the committee's questions on the vetting process, whether it was enough, whether they could vet, and screen people appropriately. Wouldn't answer the question. He's worth watching in this testimony because he can't look at Jeff Sessions in the eye. Larry Bartlett of the Department of State actually sat and told the committee something that was untrue. Larry Bartlett claims that there is, ample consultation between the Department of State, refugee resettlement agencies at the local level, and local elected officials, law enforcement, school boards, city councils, etc., and service providers prior to refugees being resettled in any particular area. This simply is not so. All of the witnesses at the hearing were asked for details, regarding additional costs to states and localities for social and welfare services to refugees, after they were resettled and after their job is done. Every single one of them stood mute, absolute silence. No one had any comments because they have absolutely no idea how much this program costs you. Now, more recent developments. On the congressional side, Trey Gowdy is holding a hearing Wednesday, October 7th. If you can, I'd listen live or have a look at the recording. This this subcommittee is under Bob Goodlatte's House Judiciary Committee, just worth noting. Now, other things that you can do, you can support Michael McCall's legislation, H.R. 3573, that would give more oversight on the program to Congress and require a vote of approval for any refugee resettlement of Syrian refugees. Brian Babin's bill goes even further and would suspend the current system of refugee resettlement until the General Accounting Office completes a thorough examination of its costs on the federal, state, and local governments. Call your congressional representatives. This is a great bill. Other things that you can do, sign our petition at Go Petition. No refugee resettlement without local okay. This petition platform has a very interesting interactive map that maps out the signatures on the petition. So you can actually show your elected officials how many signatures in favor of this issue sign the petition in their district or in their county. The more that sign, the more ammunition we'll have. Now, here is the contact information for the State Refugee Coordinator of Virginia, Kathy Cooper, right down here on East Main Street. Now, let's go back a second and recall what Larry Bartlett of the Department of State said about the supposed consultation and coordination with local elected officials and local agencies. I have an idea for an action alert here. Email Kathy Cooper and demand that you and your local elected officials and state representatives be informed and included in any meeting that ONS, the Office of Newcomer Services, conducts with other state and federal officials and representatives of anyone involved in the process. Because Larry Bartlett said that you do that already. Copy those state and local elected officials that you wish to be included in these meetings on the email. Blind copy us. Now, what does this do? It puts Kathy Cooper on notice that you need to be included and your elected officials need to be included. It puts your elected officials on notice that this is what you expect from them. It will at least raise the level of their interest in this program. And when you blind copy us at the Virginia Free Citizen Watch, we'll be able to follow developments statewide. Up until now, the Office of Newcomer Services, they talk to the refugee resettlement agencies. They talk to the federal government. They talk to their counterparts in, executive offices, but they don't talk to elected officials. Obviously, they have defined the term stakeholder to exclude anyone who is answerable to the electorate, and that needs to stop. Now, what can your local government do right now? They're going to tell you that, this is a federal program. What can I do? There's plenty that they can do. They can demand that these voluntary agencies, these refugee resettlement agencies, that are active in their county or city, explain themselves. Insist that they come to an open and public meeting and give an explanation of their activities. And make sure that there's generous time allotted for public comments. And then go to the meeting. And your local government can require these agencies to disclose their future resettlement plans to the elected officials who actually have to balance the budget. What you will find is many of these refugee resettlement agencies are not anxious to have their business, out in the public for everyone to see. You've got a very good chance of making them go away if you do that. Now, here is a list of pockets of resistance that have sprung up just since this spring, and the number grows every single day. Will your town, city, or county join a pocket of resistance or form your own? We already have one in Virginia. We'd love to have you join ours. We're located at VirginiaFreeCitizen.com. This is the website that hosts our activity. The Virginia Free Citizen Watch pertaining to refugee resettlement. Here is the URL as well. You can contact us directly at watch@VirginiaFreeCitizen.com. Check back with us often for updates, to make donations, for resources, reading material, and contact us directly for talking points and to schedule a presentation for your local group. Thank you, and goodbye.